Bette Davis finally breaks silence on her bitter rivalry with Miriam Hopkins. The rivalry between Bette Davis and Miriam Hopkins ranks among Hollywood's fiercest feuds, though Davis's later clash with Joan Crawford often steals the spotlight. Their bitter competition started before they became Hollywood icons. Hopkins dominated the theater scene and reached Hollywood first, which made Davis hugely jealous and angry. Their relationship hit rock bottom during the 1938 production of Jezebel. Hopkins's connection to the film ran deep. She had played Julie Marsden on Broadway for years and owned the play's rights jointly. She sold these rights to Warner Brothers with the promise of keeping her role. The studio gave the part to Bette Davis instead, who went on to win an Oscar for her performance. Hopkins couldn't handle this loss and was reportedly inconsolable and racked with jealousy. The actresses later worked together in The Old Maid in 1939, and again in Old Acquaintance, a film that showed the rocky course of Kit Marlowe and Millie Drake's friendship across 20 years. Directors struggled to handle both stars on set, as one studio memo revealed, "Goulding has a tough job on this picture with these two girls." Warner Brothers' publicity team saw an opportunity in playing up their feud to boost ticket sales. Bette Davis recalls first meeting Miriam Hopkins. Bette Davis and Miriam Hopkins started their legendary Hollywood feud long before they became famous. These two young actresses first met in their early 20s during summer stock theater on the East Coast. Theater records show they both landed roles in a play under prominent director George Cukor. This chance meeting sparked what would become one of cinema's most notorious professional rivalries. Davis and Hopkins clashed right from the start. They were like oil and water from the first. Two ambitious women competing for scarce roles in a cutthroat industry. Their early theater conflicts hinted at the explosive tensions that would later erupt on Hollywood soundstages. Davis's side of the story dominates the historical record. She spoke freely about her struggles with Hopkins throughout her career and later life. She gave journalists and biographers plenty of juicy details about their troubled relationship. Hopkins took the high road and never spoke ill of Davis publicly despite their ongoing feud. Davis didn't hold back when describing Hopkins's behavior during their scenes together. She memorably said Hopkins seemed distracted during Davis's moments. Her restless little spirit impatiently awaited her next line, her golden curls quivering with expectancy. This painted Hopkins as self-centered and a poor scene partner, harsh criticism in the acting world. Hopkins held the upper hand at first. She had made a bigger name for herself in 1920s theater, getting better roles and more recognition. This continued as both actresses moved to Hollywood, with Hopkins arriving first and quickly landing choice parts. Davis's legendary determination and ambition grew partly from being in Hopkins's shadow during those early years. Female actors faced brutal competition for limited roles in theater. Both women had strong personalities and refused to back down, qualities that helped their individual careers but created fireworks when they worked together. Their different backgrounds and methods added fuel to their rivalry. Hopkins brought her Southern upbringing and classical training to her craft, while Davis relied more on raw emotion and instinct. These differences showed up in their personal lives and how they dealt with colleagues, making their rivalry about more than just professional jealousy. Their careers took dramatically different paths over time. Hopkins might have reached Hollywood first and found early success, but Davis's star rose higher and lasted longer. This role reversal complicated their relationship even more, especially when they had to work together in films. Their early theater experiences set patterns that kept repeating. Davis's complaints about Hopkins being self-centered and attention-seeking during performances came up again years later. Similar issues about scene stealing and unprofessional behavior surfaced during their film collaborations. Those early theater days laid the groundwork for one of Hollywood's longest-running feuds. Neither woman could have guessed how their rivalry would play out across decades and multiple films. Their competitive relationship only got worse after events like the controversial Jezebel casting turned professional rivalry into personal hatred. Hopkins lands Jezebel role on stage. Davis takes it on screen. The theatrical production of Jezebel marked a breaking point in the already tense relationship between Miriam Hopkins and Bette Davis. Tallulah Bankhead was supposed to play the lead role, but she withdrew because of illness, and Hopkins stepped in. The Broadway show opened in 1933, but failed to attract audiences, lasting only 32 performances. This short run would later spark one of Hollywood's most talked-about rivalries. Hopkins co-owns Jezebel rights. Hopkins proved herself more business-savvy than most actresses of her time. She bought a half-interest in the Jezebel production from producer-director Guthrie McClintock. Her partial ownership gave her strong control over any future film adaptation, which meant she had a contractual claim to the role if it made it to Hollywood. Hopkins had the advantage at this point. She had arrived in Hollywood before Davis and made her mark in both theater and film. Everything changed for the failed play. After Margaret Mitchell's novel, Gone with the Wind, sparked new interest in stories about the antebellum South. The once ignored Jezebel became valuable film property, especially for studios that wanted to ride the Civil War-era wave before Selznick's much-awaited Gone with the Wind hit theaters. Warner Brothers cast Davis instead. Warner Brothers saw the value in Jezebel and approached Hopkins to buy her share of the rights. The studio paid her $12,000 and made what turned out to be an empty promise she would be the first actress considered for the role. Hopkins took this as a guarantee, but the studio had other plans. Warner Brothers had actually bought the rights specifically for Bette Davis. Walter McEwen, who headed the studio's story department, wanted Davis to play what he called the little bitch of an aristocratic Southern girl. This chance came to Davis during a rocky time with Warner Brothers. She had just lost her lawsuit trying to break her contract. Hopkins later learned she had been considered and rejected almost immediately. Warner Brothers' deceptive handling turned what was once professional competition into a deep personal betrayal. Hopkins felt crushed when she lost the Broadway role she created to her rival. Davis wins. Oscar. Hopkins is devastated. William Wyler directed Davis to a performance that would make Hollywood history. The film became both a box office hit and critical success. Davis's portrayal of the strong-willed Southern belle Julie Marsden won universal praise. She took home her second Best Actress Oscar at the 11th Academy Awards ceremony in 1939. The film got 5 Academy Award nominations and won 2. Davis for Best Actress and Faye Bainter for Supporting Actress. Davis thanked Wyler during her acceptance speech, saying he had taught her a great deal about her abilities and talents. Hopkins couldn't bear Davis's triumph. She became inconsolable and racked with jealousy after losing both the role and watching her rival's success. The Oscar win hurt even more because Hopkins had created the character but never got to bring it to screen. Their careers often followed this pattern. Roles one actress missed became defining moments for the other. The Jezebel episode shifted their professional standing dramatically. Davis's star kept rising while Hopkins watched her nemesis outshine her. Jezebel set the stage for their future work together. Davis now held all the cards, and their next project, The Old Maid, played out against a backdrop of deeper personal hatred and professional envy. The Old Maid sets the stage for on-screen rivalry. The rivalry between Bette Davis and Miriam Hopkins exploded on the set of The Old Maid in 1939. After the Jezebel drama, Warner Brothers made a daring choice to cast these two rivals as cousins, fighting for the same man's love. Their work together quickly turned the movie set into a battleground where both actresses used every trick they knew. Hopkins wears Jezebel costume to provoke Davis. Hopkins showed up on the first day wearing an exact copy of Davis's dress from Jezebel. She clearly wanted to upset Davis and remind everyone that she thought the role should have been hers. Davis kept her cool and later said, "I completely ignored the whole thing." This costume stunt kicked off Hopkins' calculated plan to throw off her co-star. Davis said, "Miriam used, and I must give her credit, knew every trick in the book. I became fascinated watching them appear one by one." Her tactics ranged from subtle moves to obvious ones, and she often refused to look at Davis during their scenes. When she was supposed to be listening to me, her eyes would wander off into some other world in which she was the sweetest of them all, Davis noted. Her restless little spirit was impatiently awaiting her next line, her golden curls quivering with expectancy. The tension got so bad that during one scene, Hopkins' attempt to steal the spotlight almost collapsed the couch they sat on. Director struggles to manage both stars. Edmund Goulding had the impossible job of keeping two strong-willed actresses in check. The situation became so heated that Davis and Hopkins often called in sick, which pushed the production almost 2 weeks behind schedule. Davis wanted to play both female leads in the film, which created more tension between them. She felt frustrated when she couldn't get this dual role, while Hopkins would have been left out completely if Davis had gotten her way. Hopkins' personal life made things even worse. She was going through a rough divorce from director Anatole Litvak, and she reportedly suspected Davis of having an affair with Anatole. This personal drama added fuel to their professional fire. Goulding summed it up perfectly. Whatever respect they had for each other as professionals was quickly thrown out of the window when one or the other didn't get her way. If it wasn't lighting, it was costuming or camera angles or lines. There were times they behaved like perfect little bitches, but I loved them both. Feud leaks to press. News of the battles between Davis and Hopkins spread like wildfire. The antics on set leaked into the newspapers and created quite a buzz. Warner Brothers saw an opportunity and ran with it. The studio's publicity team turned the rivalry into gold. They set up photos of Davis and Hopkins going for each other's throats, while Goulding tried to break it up. They even shot publicity photos of the actresses wearing boxing gloves, facing off with their poor director playing referee. Despite all the drama, the movie got great reviews. The New York Times loved Davis's performance, calling it poignant and wise, hard and austere of surface, yet communicating through it the deep tenderness, the hidden anguish of the heartbroken mother. They found Hopkins' performance less certain and said it was gentler than Miss Akins had contrived her. The Old Maid turned out to be both a critical and commercial success, setting the stage for the actresses to work together again. The movie showed that Davis and Hopkins could create magic on screen, whatever their personal feelings were, something Warner Brothers would use again in their next film together. Warner Brothers exploits feud for publicity. The relationship between Bette Davis and Miriam Hopkins grew increasingly tense on set. Warner Brothers executives spotted a golden chance. Rather than hiding their hostility, the studio thought over how to use the actress's mutual dislike to boost ticket sales. This strategy created some of Hollywood's most memorable publicity shots and became the blueprint to market celebrity feuds for decades. Boxing glove photo shoot. The Davis-Hopkins rivalry's most iconic image came from a carefully coordinated publicity session for The Old Maid. Studio photographers captured both stars wearing boxing gloves and fighting poses. Director Edmund Goulding stood between them, looking resigned as an impromptu referee. This theatrical display showed what Hollywood already knew. These actresses truly despised each other. The photo session worked because it mixed theatrical flair with raw emotion. Both actresses joined in, willingly knowing its publicity value. Yet you could feel the tension in the air. The boxing gloves represented what the crew saw every day. Two talented performers locked in a constant power struggle with their director caught between them. Goulding handled his challenging position with grace. Whatever respect they had for each other as professionals was quickly thrown out of the window when one or the other didn't get her way. He observed, "There were times they behaved like perfect little bitches, but I loved them both, and I think the admiration was likewise." Media coverage fuels ticket sales. Warner Brothers' publicity team made the most of the feud beyond the boxing gloves photo. They took full advantage of the dueling divas and played up their feud to boost ticket sales for the upcoming film. Newspapers were happy to report the behind-the-scenes drama, giving the studio substantial free publicity. Producer Hal B. Wallace later revealed in an interview that the feud was genuine, not manufactured. It was an incredible feud, just fantastic. They would each prolong their arrival on the set, trying to make the other wait. I think later, the studio tried to claim it was all just publicity, but it was the real thing. Those girls hated each other. The studio doubled down on this publicity strategy in 1943, when Davis and Hopkins reunited for Old Acquaintance. Their rivalry had become so prominent that it was used to promote the movie. The marketing for this second collaboration focused heavily on their rivalry. Audiences now cared about both the film's plot and the real-life drama between its stars. Public fascination with dueling divas. Warner Brothers, marketing succeeded because it tapped into people's fascination with Hollywood's female rivalries. Stories of glamorous movie stars and behind-the-scenes power struggles fascinated audiences. These personal conflicts made larger-than-life figures seem more human while adding depth to their on-screen performances. The Davis-Hopkins campaign created a template that Hollywood would use repeatedly. Professional rivalries became marketable stories that lived beyond the films themselves. By commercializing their antagonism, Warner Brothers made sure people would remember the Davis-Hopkins feud long after their films had left public memory. The publicity strategy enhanced the actresses' performances in unexpected ways. Their real-life tension created electric on-screen chemistry, especially in Old Acquaintance, where they played former friends turned rivals. Davis's character, violently shaking Hopkins, showed how personal dislike could create compelling cinema, while giving the publicity team more material to work with. A simple personality clash had evolved through Warner Brothers' strategic publicity into one of Hollywood's most profitable stories of female rivalry. Old acquaintance reignites tensions on set. Warner Brothers paired Bette Davis and Miriam Hopkins again for Old Acquaintance 1943, 4 years after their heated collaboration on The Old Maid. Their old feud sparked up right as they reunited, which led to one of Hollywood's most tense productions. Personal accusations and professional jealousy ran so deep that they almost brought the whole project down. Hopkins accuses Davis of affair with Litvak. Hopkins had grown certain about Davis by 1943. She claimed Davis had an affair with her ex-husband director, Anatole Litvak, during their marriage. Several sources say Hopkins started suspecting this during The Old Maid, while she was going through a messy split with her husband. Some reports suggest the affair happened later when Davis filmed All This in Heaven 2 in 1940. But their relationship was beyond repair. The timing couldn't have been worse. Hopkins showed up on set carrying all her old grudges. Studio executives saw trouble coming. One memo stated, "The old Hopkins-Davis feud has flared up again, but was very quickly stamped out by our immediately calling the turn on both of them." Infamous shaking scene becomes iconic. The movie's peak moment came during a confrontation scene where Davis's character shakes Hopkins' character in frustration. News about the filming spread fast, and half of Warner Brothers showed up to watch. The scene drew so much attention that a reporter from Life magazine even tried to get into the studio to cover the event. Hopkins tried to ruin the scene by playing dead like a doll with a broken neck each time Davis grabbed her shoulders. Director Vincent Sherman told her she needed to resist or the scene would get laughs. But Hopkins just went limp again until Davis walked off the set in disgust. Director Vincent Sherman caught in the middle. Sherman had the tough job of handling two actresses who truly hated each other. He had to convince Davis to come back after she stormed off and somehow piece together a usable scene. He managed to get a few shots he could edit together, though their ongoing fights made the production last almost twice as long as planned. Sherman built a better connection with Hopkins than their previous director, Edmund Goulding. Sources note that Sherman and Hopkins got along well right from the start, but it took a little more convincing for Davis to accept him. Davis likely saw Sherman's good relationship with Hopkins as favoritism, which added more tension. Sherman succeeded despite these challenges. He kept the ladies from chewing the scenery and created a film that critics loved. The hostile energy between both stars made filming difficult, but created compelling on-screen chemistry that raised the film above typical melodrama. Hopkins and Davis' feud spills into personal lives. Hollywood's glamorous facade couldn't hide the bitter personal hatred between Bette Davis and Miriam Hopkins that surpassed their professional rivalry. Their relationship turned toxic as career competition evolved into personal vendettas. Accusations of betrayal poisoned every interaction they had both on camera and off. Hopkins's divorce and jealousy. The timing couldn't have been worse. The Old Maid filming coincided with Hopkins' messy separation from husband Anatole Litvak. Her marriage fell apart, while her hatred for Davis intensified. Hopkins became more convinced that her co-star had betrayed her in the most personal way possible. She tried to undermine Davis throughout production with tactics that ranged from subtle camera blocking to outright scene sabotage. Producer Hal B. Wallace saw it firsthand. It was an incredible feud, just fantastic. They would each prolong their arrival on the set, trying to make the other wait. Those girls hated each other. The situation took its toll on everyone. Davis later admitted, "I went home every night and screamed at everybody. Davis' alleged affair with Litvak, Hopkins' deep-seated anger, stemmed from her conviction that Davis had an affair with Litvak. Multiple sources confirm that Hopkins believed Davis was having an affair with Anatole Litvak during their marriage. This added raw emotional pain to their already damaged relationship. Hollywood insiders saw something more calculated at play. One account suggests it would not surprise anyone who knows anything about Davis if she had the affair with Litvak solely to spite Hopkins. That indicates how vindictive their rivalry had become. Historical accounts still debate whether the affair happened during or after Hopkins' marriage. Mutual sabotage and mind games. The Litvak situation sparked an all-out psychological war. Hopkins used every trick she could think of on set. She would hold her cigarette at an angle to purposely block Davis's face from the camera, and refused to engage when Davis was speaking her lines and the camera was off her. Davis fought back with her own tactics. She reportedly convinced director Goulding to cut Hopkins' best scenes. Yet both actresses kept up appearances in public. Hopkins played it down in interviews. It makes a good story when women have feuds on their pictures. Somebody thought it would be good publicity. Davis showed her mastery of the subtle dig. She called Hopkins a terribly good actress, but terribly jealous. A clever way to praise Hopkins' talent while questioning her character. Critics and fans weigh in on their performances. Critics and audiences recognized exceptional performances from both Miriam Hopkins and Bette Davis in their collaborative films, despite their personal conflicts. Their real-life animosity created compelling on-screen dynamics that lifted their work above typical Hollywood fare, according to professional reviews. Hopkins praised for comic timing. Miriam Hopkins got widespread critical acclaim for her vibrant comedic abilities. Reviews highlighted her superior cinematic know-how and exquisite work in close-up. Hopkins showed she was willing to look ridiculous for a role throughout her career. She could transform humorless characters into sources of hilarity, a rare skill among actresses of her era. Critics often celebrated her unique energy, which came from her broad presentational 19th century pantomime style. Her work in Old Acquaintance especially impressed fans. She really rolls up her sleeves and digs into this part with obvious relish. An IMDb reviewer pointed out, Miriam is something of a horror, here all superficial bubble and vicious backstabbing jealousy. You can't help but admire how well Hopkins performs the role. Davis lauded for restraint and depth. Bette Davis, on the other hand, got praise for her controlled performances. The New York Times described her acting as poignant and wise-hard and austere of surface, yet communicating through it the deep tenderness, the hidden anguish of her characters. Critics saw Davis as a perfectionist whose forceful and intense style created memorable screen moments. Reviews often compared Davis's restraint and depth with Hopkins's theatrical approach in their joint works. A critic described Davis's performance as fluid and full of contrivance. Her composure created the perfect counterpoint to Hopkins's animated style. Feud enhances on-screen chemistry. The tension between Davis and Hopkins created electric on-screen chemistry that captivated audiences. Their real-life conflict seems to have fed into the spark between the actresses and energized their scenes. Critics noted the woman versus woman war got serious ammunition from their genuine animosity. Their authentic rivalry exceeded acting whenever they appeared together on screen. A reviewer summed it up perfectly. Their scenes together are pure joy. showing how genuine conflict can create more compelling performances than manufactured harmony. Feud ends with silence and separation. After the explosive production of Old Acquaintance, the legendary feud between Bette Davis and Miriam Hopkins did not end with a dramatic confrontation or a tearful reconciliation, but with a quiet, unbridgeable chasm. The actresses never worked together again, their mutual animosity having reached a point where even the promise of a box office hit could not entice them back into the same room. Their rivalry transitioned from a fiery public spectacle into a cold, enduring silence. In the decades that followed, Davis continued to speak openly and often scathingly about Hopkins, cementing her version of events in the public consciousness through countless interviews and her candid memoirs. Hopkins, in stark contrast, maintained a dignified public silence, refusing to engage in the mudslinging. She took her side of the story to the grave, leaving a legacy of unanswered questions and allowing Davis's narrative to become the feud's definitive history. Ultimately, their rivalry concluded, not with a bang, but with a permanent, unspoken agreement to occupy separate spheres of the Hollywood universe. The silence itself became the final act of their long-running drama, a testament to a bitterness so profound that it needed no further words. The curtain fell on one of cinema's greatest feuds, leaving behind two iconic films and a timeless lesson in how personal hatred can fuel unforgettable art.